and welcome to MCPL Readers Lounge Live. This is the first of a quarterly set of discussions where we're going to be sharing some book suggestions, maybe answering some of your questions about books and reading, and talking about some of the other MCPL services and programs that we have to offer. My name is Angie Strathman. I'm the Reader Services Librarian, and I'm joined by Scott and Andrew, who I'll let introduce themselves here in just a bit. We're going to be talking about a lot of books and other content today, and we will have a link to all of that in the description down below. But the best way to get to know us is to talk about what we've been reading lately. So Scott, what have you been reading lately?
Great. So I'm Scott. I'm in Youth Services. I've been reading a teen book called Into the Light by Marcus Shiro. If you're into like Netflix's The Devil in Ohio, or even the Marvel series Runaways, which is about some kids, it's one of my favorites, some kids whose parents are supervillains and they're on the run, then this is a great book to check out. It's about a 17-year-old orphan named Manny, who has bounced around the foster care system and has now found himself in the home of a family that is in a cult-like church. He escapes from them, but a murder at the church kind of alerts him. He thinks it's his sister Elena, possibly. And so in searching for answers, he kind of has to face a lot of his past and a lot of those demons. So it's a really great suspenseful read.
How about you, Andrew? What have you been reading lately?
Actually, something I read and really enjoyed recently was All Boys Aren't Blue by George M. Johnson. And part of the reason I read it is one of my goals last year was to read all of the American Library Association's most challenged books, and that was near the top of the list. It is a young adult memoir by George M. Johnson, just describing their life growing up as a Black queer teen in New Jersey and Virginia, and many of the trials and triumphs that they went through growing up. And I just really loved their stories, but also that it was written so well for, I think, a young adult audience. So many memoirs are just written for advanced readers, and I really loved that this one felt more accessible in how it was written.
Been on my list for a long time. It just bumped up a little bit further. So thanks, Andrew. Well, what I have been reading, or actually listening to lately, is the Murderbot Diaries series by Martha Wells. Murderbot is a security android, and in the first book in this series, it is on a surveying mission for a planet with other humans, and its job is to protect them. And Murderbot has disabled its governor module, but not because it has any like nefarious plans to like kill the humans or anything. It just wants to download a bunch of TV shows and watch them without interruption. Murderbot's a bit of a misanthrope, so I identify with Murderbot a lot. I also want people to leave me alone and watch so I can watch my shows. But Murderbot actually also cares about its humans a little bit more than it lets on, especially when they're threatened, which happens a lot over the course of the series. What I also like about these is they're novellas, so they're only about 120 pages, so they're very short, about 3 hours on audio. So you can tear through them very quickly, and I just love the voice and the character of Murderbot. The first book is All Systems Red, and then the second book, Artificial Condition, brings in a really nosy transport ship that Murderbot plays off of, and so I really enjoyed that one.
It sounds really neat how it's called Murderbot, but the Murderbot doesn't murder.
Yeah, I was a little let down. Why doesn't Murderbot murder?
Murderbot may or may not have murdered people, and that is part of the mystery that you explore throughout the course of the series. Okay. But yeah, it is probably a little disturbing that the character I'm most related to in the last couple of years is called Murderbot. But there you go.
Especially disturbing sitting next to you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you said that
see you scooch away.
Is that one a young adult novel also?
No, this one is actually for adults.
Adults.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, Scott, maybe you've been reading something for the younger age lately, or are you reading adult stuff too?
Yeah, so I did read an adult book recently called The Bandit Queens, which is really great. I can talk about that in a little bit, but you asked about younger stuff. So read this book called Rhythm of Time. So One of my favorite things in all of literature is time travel. And so, wait, I forgot that I had a question for you both. Do you know the first rule of time travel?
Don't change anything.
Don't change anything. Yes, the butterfly effect. So, like the butterfly flapping its wings one place can cause a hurricane someplace else. So this is about a young kid named Raheem. He wants to be a rapper, so he goes back to the 90s to a point right before his famous rap group broke up to kind of figure out how to become a better rapper. And in the process, befriends his father as a younger person. When he makes it back to our time, everything's messed up because he befriended and, broke the rules of time travel. So he now has to fix it with his new friend Keisha. And it's written by Questlove, who's the drummer for The Roots, who are the house band of Jimmy Fallon, The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon.
And actually, I have a question. He goes back because of a rap group he likes.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a real rap group or is it a made-up in-world rap group?
It is a made-up in-world rap group. I love 90s rap, so I was checking it out. No, not on Spotify.
Well, but that reminds me of a young adult, actually middle grade novel that I read recently, and I looked up to see if the character in it was real or made up. It was called The Civil War of Amos Abernathy by Michael Lealy, and it's about a little boy who participates in his local living history museum, which is just about just warms my nerdy little heart, But he does a research project on a veteran from that community from the Civil War. And so it was interesting. There was actually an author's note at the end explaining that that person was real, that he had done that research on. So not only is it, it's a fictional world with this hint of reality in his research project.
That sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to kind of continue starting with the young adult reads, but moving it on up to the adult realm. Did either of you guys read Encyclopedia Brown, Nancy Drew, Harriet the Spy growing up?
I did some Hardy Boys. Ooh, I did love Harriet the Spy. My 5th grade teacher read it to us after lunch every day.
I was a Boxcar Children fan.
Encyclopedia Brown was my guy. But do you ever wonder what happens when they grow up? That's what this new book, Charlotte Ills is Not a Detective by Katie Siegel, is about. Like many child stars, she's having a pretty bumpy transition to adulthood. So she's given up mysteries, but she doesn't really have any other direction in her life. And so her brother tries to help her out by enlisting her for a new case. And it eventually evolves into a mystery at his girlfriend's, Olivia's, workplace around workplace organizing. But the real fun of this book is not necessarily the mystery, it is the characters. Because not only is Charlotte bringing in her brother and her brother's girlfriend, but also her childhood friends, Lucy and Gabe. And so really it's the dynamic that's super fun. They all have their different kind of skill sets to bring to the mystery and their different attitudes too. And there's just a lot of really great banter and friendship dynamics. It also kind of has a kind of touching story about how friendships change and evolve as we grow up and evolve too. But yeah, it just brought me back to those days, reading those fun childhood stories and just imagining what that might be like as you get older and that goes away.
That reminds me, speaking of things we were fans of when they were little being grown up, I read a book called Meddling Kids, which, if you're familiar with that term, it's probably from Scooby-Doo. And it's a book, they're not the actual Scooby-Doo characters, it is characters that are suspiciously like the Scooby-Doo characters, grown up, and some of the difficulty they've had in life because they were child detectives. And it sort of toes the line between drama and sci-fi with a little bit of horror mixed in. Very much an adult novel.
All right, I'm trying to imagine Shaggy grown up and what that would look like. So, yeah.
It's just the same. He's just got a deeper voice.
All right, well, that's just a little bit of what we've been reading lately. And next time around, we'll have some different books to share for you.
So our next segment is called Ask a Librarian. And I feel since I'm running this section, I should give this segment like a a big theme song. So it goes, Ask a Librarian. This is where we have some questions from you to ask us, the librarians. And so my first question is, how do you keep up with the new books that are coming out?
Well, I am someone who both personally and professionally loves to read about books almost as much as I like to read them. So I kind of have like lots of different places I go to, and then I kind of see what I keep seeing over and over again, or what gets recommended most enthusiastically. So one thing I do as a librarian perk that we get is sometimes we get access to books that aren't published yet. So about a third of my reading are books that are coming out. So I'm hearing about that there. But I also like to seek out spaces where people who love a particular genre are. And so for me, some of those spaces are, if you love mysteries and thrillers, it's crimereads.com. If you like speculative fiction, so science fiction and fantasy, Tor.com or io9.com. I love the podcast Fated Mates if you love romance. And then like in all the various social media platforms, I like try to justify the time that I spend there by saying it's work related, by following publishers and authors and book bloggers and things like that.
Sure.
So lots and lots of different spaces. How about you, Andrew?
Well, I'm a heavy audiobook listener, and so the Libby app actually makes it really convenient. The homepage of the app has a button that just says newest, and it'll show you all of the newest things in the app. And then I can filter by things that are currently available or things that are audiobooks only, so that I can keep my holds list up full of new and forthcoming items.
Oh, so it does do forthcoming and on-order items.
It does, and it'll show, if you click on a title, it'll show the date that it will become available. So if, a book is available November 1st, but you can get on the holds list before it's actually available.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
I love to do that in our actual catalog for print items too. If you go to the Explore section, you can find titles that are both the new titles that have come out, but there's also, you can click on the ones that are on order. So I like to go through there from time to time and filter by my favorite genres. And all those things that I've heard about other places, go ahead and put my holds on there. So I'm regularly hitting my 400 holds limit and pausing them all until I'm ready for whatever I'm in the mood for next.
So that's a new piece of information I think I just learned. I've been here for 6 years. How many holds can a person using the library put on their account?
400.
400.
I will say, if you are an ebook user, digital audiobook user, the maximum is 50.
Sure.
So in the Libby app, you get fewer books.
So I wanted to kind of talk about, one, it's Ask a Librarian, so I was like, hey, maybe I'll talk about some librarian perks. So one of the things we get, we work in an office building, and all of the books for the system come out of here, and so there's a hallway just filled with brand new books that have just come in, so just walking down that hall and touching them and seeing what's going on. The thing that I really like to use personally is Book Riot. And Book Riot is a really great website. It was started by a librarian, has a lot of great writers, and they have a bunch of different email lists. So if you're into audiobooks, graphic novels, if you're into certain genres, you can sign up for those lists. And they send them daily, weekly. It just kind of depends on the list, but great way to find new reads.
I also really like Book Riot. They also have some really fun podcasts. So if you like to listen, so I will sometimes listen to them on my commute too. So that's also a fun place. And I also like going into, my job takes me to the branches a lot of times. And so each branch has different things on their news shelves, and they also have so many fun displays. So that's I'm always picking up something when I'm out there too.
Great. All right, our next question is, any suggestions for an adult who would like to get into graphic novels? They are a true beginner in the form.
I mean, I have a couple that come to mind, and they're young adult graphic novels, which I would say even for an adult user, young adult graphic novels are a great place to start. The first one that came to mind is Nimona, which I loved that graphic novel. And then Netflix actually this summer released a movie adaptation, which I also loved. So I'd say Nimona is a wonderful place to start for a new graphic novel reader.
Yeah, and I love Nimona. Like, I just feel like anything can happen in that world. And Indy Stevenson, the author, also wrote this. It's for slightly younger, but like middle school teen, called Lumberjanes, which is about a group of girls at kind of a Girl Scout camp kind of thing. But wild things happen. They magical worlds, bears, all sorts of stuff happens in it. That would make a great TV series too. So I hope it happens. I think a good place to start is just with superheroes. Superheroes are kind of everywhere right now. Most people have their kind of favorite superhero. I think comics are a little bit easier to get into than like the graphic novels you'll hear about all the time, like Mouse, which is great. But I would still start with something, Spider-Man for me, something like that. I just look into a character I already know and love, and pick up a comic book about them.
So I'm curious, who is your favorite superhero?
Spider-Man's a big one. I really like reading Batman comics and seeing Batman movies, but I would say I'm more of a Marvel than DC person, but I don't love to separate myself that way.
I'm sorry, I'm a DC guy.
person?
my favorite superhero is Batman. It's actually Poison Ivy, but I'll go with Batman. And I much prefer spending time in the DC universe.
Well, I actually prefer the non-superhero graphic novels, although Miss Marvel would probably be my favorite in this superhero universe. But one I would recommend is Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and that is actually a graphic novel that teaches you how to read graphic novels. Mm-hmm. So it talks you through everything from like how panels are set up and how time works and flows within graphic novels. So that really helped me. I'm more of a words person mm-hmm. than a visual person, and that taught me kind of what to pay attention to when I'm looking at a graphic novel.
And I think I think it goes with yours and Spider-Man. So Spider-Man Day, August 1st every year. And I just discovered a book called Reading Comics the Marvel Way, where Spider-Man gets sent to and stuck in a graphic novel by one of his villains. And so in order to get out of the graphic novel, has to learn about how it works and how to read a comic book. So I think it's just going back to my same thing. Just find superheroes and read that.
Well, I mean, I was going to go the opposite direction because of the books you mentioned, and mentioned that a lot of new graphic novel readers don't realize how much nonfiction there is in the graphic novel world, and memoirs and biographies and probably juvenile history graphic novels are another great way to kind of step into it for people who may not be as apt for the superheroes.
Yeah, one kind of along that lines, a memoir that I really liked is Good Talk by Vera Jacob. And that one has really beautiful collage-like illustrations, but it is about a woman who is of Indian descent. She's married to a white Jewish man, and their son starts to become obsessed with Michael Jackson and starts to ask all these questions about race. And so that sends her back in her own history to all the different conversations she's had about race with other people, her parents, her friends, former boyfriends, her husband, in-laws, etc. And so since it takes place in a series of conversations, it also makes a really fantastic audiobook. It actually won one of the awards for the American Library Association for audiobooks. And so I would suggest getting the audiobook and then having the print book in front of you so that way you can listen as you look at the text, and that kind of can be a good way to feel it out too.
Yeah, and I think the kind of move towards comic books and graphic novels having audiobooks is really interesting. Nimona has an award-winning audiobook. I feel like you need to listen to it as someone who's read the book, seen the movie, and now you need to listen to the audiobook and figure out. Like,
I can't quite imagine how they would describe all of that in an audiobook
It's
form.
got a full cast, so it's just playing off the characters and everything. I think a couple other things. One, is if you're into manga, if you want to get started there, which is Japanese comic books, find something from the publisher Viz Media because it gives you a little layout of how you read this because you're reading it a little differently than you would read Western comics, and the panels kind of go in a different way. And that's it. Do you have any more to add to that?
I just have one quickly. Again, I mentioned I'm more of a words person, but one that really taught me to look at all the background stuff and see how important it was for like character development was one called A Career in Books by Kate Gavino, and it's about 4 young Asian American women who have their first job in publishing in New York, and their downstairs neighbor is a former Booker Prize winning author, and so they're trying to revitalize her career while they're also kind of finding their way in their own path as well. But just it's all the fun stuff in the background of the illustrations that I loved about this graphic novel. So everything from what's on a coffee mug to what's on a tote bag. There's like one time one of the characters is listening to a playlist called Indie Ladies with Bangs, and I'm like, I would love to listen to that playlist. And like there's this panel of all the literary types of people you find in a coffee shop. And so all of those things just were like a fun way to add to the characters without, that would feel kind of weird and shoehorned if you were trying to do that in prose.
Sure.
So.
I think one other thing, this one, we've got all sorts of suggestions, huh? Is graphic novel adaptations are a big thing that's happening now. So there's lots of classics that are adapted, but even favorite titles like Twilight. Any Rick Riordan book now has a graphic novel with it. But that's another great place to start where you already know the story. Do we have any more to add about graphic novels?
Just on that vein, I really love Kindred by Octavia Butler as an adaptation. Really wonderful.
Great. All right, our last question is, I want to read at the same time as my child. Is there anything we can both read together?
Yes.
Just end of conversation. Yes. So Andrew has ended it. We're going to go. No.
Well, I mean, I'd say regardless of what reading level your child is at, there's always something that you can read with them. And I think our catalog gives you search options to search by, say, Lexile number or grade or some of those options to kind of find things that might be appropriate for both your kids, and then you would read it. You could read it with them. And then also the library has the Your Next Read, and so you can always ask our librarians, and they will be happy to give you suggestions.
Sure. I'm going to give you a couple awards. The first one that's still in place if you have younger kids, it doesn't say what age the child is in this one, but your 0 to 5-year-olds, Missouri has the Building Block Award, and the Building Block Award is picture books that are meant to be great read-alouds, so you'll often see our staff reading them at story times, but they are great to read together. We always have bookmarks so you can make sure they all get done, and then the kids, the 0 to 5-year-olds, get a vote on their favorite every year. And that feels super cute to me, like, hey, which one was your favorite, to a 1-year-old.
So I did do that with my kids one year and then had them vote. It was a lot of fun.
And the other one is not actually current, but it's called the E.B. White Read Aloud Award. It was kind of a victim of the 2020 COVID crisis. So the last one was awarded in 2019, but they have middle grade picture books and maybe even a young adult category that are just great to read aloud. And so if you have a kid that's kind of on the older end or maybe reading at a higher level, it's a great place to start to kind of get some longer books to maybe do like a chapter a night with them.
Yeah, and when I was in the branch, this would be a very common question we would have parents ask. And a lot of times their default method is to think back to what they read and loved as a kid, and they want to share it with their child, which I totally understand and get that impulse to be able to see your favorite through, your child's eyes would be super fun. But one thing that I like to do, or what I would like to suggest, is also like ask your kid what are they excited about, and sometimes to have a grown-up pay attention to the things that they love and try out a thing that they love on their recommendation can be a great way to kind of bond with your kid. I did that recently on a family vacation, and we had like a week-long stay. And so I asked my 12-year-old niece what her favorite book was. And so I had time to read it on that vacation, and we got to talk about it together. And she just loved that someone in her life like cared about what she was really super into. So it was a lot of fun.
What did she suggest to you?
She suggested a juvenile horror book called Small Spaces by Catherine Arden. Which was kind of interesting because I'd really been wanting to read Catherine Arden, but for her adult fantasy books. And so instead I snuck her in through the kids' horror. So
Cool. Yeah, that actually happened to me with my cousin. I have a cousin who's quite a bit younger than me, and was reading the Ranger's Apprentice series, which is like Game of Thrones for kids, also better than Game of Thrones, in my opinion. So it's about a kid. I have a theme of like orphaned kids. So about a kid who is living in a castle and doesn't really know what he's going to do, but this guy hires him to be a ranger for the kingdom, which are kind of like the spies of the kingdom, and he gets archery skills and close combat skills, and there's a lot of really great stuff going on in the series.
And actually, I was going to say, just one more. My daughter recommended a book series to me that I then read. And it was a little trilogy that I didn't realize were nonfiction. Nonfiction graphic novels about this girl and her experiences in elementary and middle school. And it was called Just Friends, Best Friends, and Forever Friends. And because the kids read way different genres than I generally do. And of course, generally young adult or kids books. But she recommended it, so I read it, and then we sat down and had some talks about the kind of things, the character was going through in her experiences.
Great. Thank you all. So that is it for our time on Ask a Librarian. If you have questions for us, you can email booktalk@mymcpl.org and ask us anything about library life, what we're reading, or suggestions for yourself.
So we've come to the last segment, and in this one, we get to tell you about all of the things that we like that are going on in the library right now. And so to start, Angie, what do you have to share?
Well, one of my favorite things is to talk about books with anybody and everybody, usually off camera. But one way I do that is through book groups. And so October is National Reading Group Month. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the things MCPL can do for you if you are in a book group or you are just interested in starting one. So obviously MCPL has lots of different book groups that you can join at various branches. Most branches have at least one that you can join. Some are reading just a variety of titles. Some are genre specific. We also offer virtual book groups that you can come talk about a specific book. And I'm just curious, Scott and Andrew, are either of you in book groups or have been in book groups?
I have been in book groups. Personal book groups. I actually haven't been part of a library book group. Although actually my son was pretty well addicted to one of the library book groups for a while. There was a juvenile graphic novel book club that he really hopes comes back someday, so that he can continue reading graphic novels and talking about them with other kids.
I've never been in a book club. I went to a book club meeting in my hometown for the high school while I was a librarian. And it was a book I hated, and there was like one other kid that also hated it, and I just like sat back and watched her like tear it apart and felt proud, I guess, but everyone else loved it. So I was like, I don't know how I would not be mean to books that I don't like.
Well, those actually make for some of the best discussions when everybody loves a book. Sometimes that makes for kind of a boring discussion. So when people have different opinions, that can be really fun. Yeah, so some of the other things that MCPL offers, if maybe you don't want to attend a library one, but you're already involved in a book group with your neighbors or your friends, we offer a book group collection. And so they are copies of 10 books of the same title that you can reserve up to a year in advance. And so it's a collection. We have over 1,000 kits, and they're curated by our librarians for books that will stimulate really great discussion. So you can talk to your local branch, and they will be able to help you out and get started with using that collection. And then another thing that we are offering because of National Reading Group Month we're offering a series of programs called Boost Your Book Group. So in those programs, we are going to be talking about all the ways that MCPL can help you with your book group. But we're also going to be talking about things like how to pick a book, what makes for a good book group title. Have you guys, either of you, read a book that as soon as you finish, you're like, I need someone else to read this
Yes,
so I can talk about it? So we're going to talk about how to find those kinds of books that are part of our collection. And we're also going to be talking about things about how to come up with questions to talk about with your group, different ways that you can have a book group that are, instead of just all reading the same book together. I was
going to say, so you're saying like a book group where we would all read a horror book, and then we would all come together and just share each other's books just in a big group setting.
Yeah, so like the traditional way is we would all like read the exact same title. But yeah, there are some different things that we do. Like the virtual book group that I lead is called the Stay at Home Book Group, where everybody just talks about what we've been reading that month, kind of like we were doing here at the beginning. So it's just a fun way to hear about new titles and add them to your list. And then a lot of times people will come back the next month and want to talk about something they discovered there previously. We'll talk about different ideas like that. And then I'll be book talking some of the books that are in our book group collection. And so those programs are going to be September 6th at Eastleigh Summit Branch, October 3rd at Colburn Road, and October 12th at South Independence.
And what was the name of that program again?
Oh, yes, it was called Boost Your Book Group. But it is for if you already have a book group, but also if you're looking to start one, you might also get some tips for that too.
Cool.
But if somebody's not available to attend one of those programs, they could still email us about booktalk@mymcpl.org to get some more information that might help them.
Yes, that would be a great place so we could give them information about our book group services, and as well as coming in and talking to your local branch, because most of them has a liaison that works with our community book groups that would be able to help them out there too.
Okay, I love this. It feels like we're making book groups more accessible to more people, and actually kind of makes me want to come to one of the events so I can start my own book group.
Yeah, well, and I love the library book groups, and I've loved the people that I've met there too. But you can have wine at your personal book group, so that's where our book group collection comes in, if you want to do that. So,
I have a question. Sorry to jump in.
Yes, go ahead.
As someone who's never been to a book group and has only seen them in like comedy stuff on TV or movies, how do you engage with the book group? Do you set guidelines when you agree to like me to read a book or join a particular book group? Should you be taking notes to bring to the book group when you go to a book group? Are you in general dissecting kind of like the author's work or the story itself, the characters and their actions? What do you discuss at a book group?
Yeah, I mean, obviously each book group is going to have its own kind of feel. I've been to some book groups where it's more important to like follow celebrity gossip on Twitter than it is to actually have read the book. But in general, a lot of times we'll talk about the characters and maybe the choices they make. We might talk about, the different plot points in the novel and things like that. As a leader for book groups, I usually take a lot of notes, but I don't think it's necessary for an actual person unless they want to make notes of questions they want to ask the rest of the group. That's one thing that I like to do. Just like, hey, what did you think of that? And what I love about book groups, one of my favorite book group discussions was Homegoing by Ya Jesse. And sometimes it's a way to talk about big, important issues, but with a little bit of a remove, so it makes it a little bit more comfortable to talk about. And that book talked about kind of the legacy of slavery through several generations, and we were able to have this really amazing discussion about race in America with this group. And it was just an easy way to start that conversation and for people to feel comfortable participating because they were able to have a starting point for that discussion.
That sounds really awesome. Thank you for sharing, Angie. Well, Scott, what's going on?
Yeah, so I wanted to talk about October being Dyslexia Awareness Month. And kind of the cool thing about the library is there are all these resources that you don't really think about that are available to you. And so some suggestions to make your reading or your family's reading a little more dyslexia friendly. So if you're just working on your own things on your own computer, changing your font to something like Arial or Comic Sans, which is the joke of the font world, but that's okay because it creates a lot of space in between the letters, so it makes it easier to read. The Libby app, which you mentioned earlier, where you can read ebooks and listen to e-audiobooks available from your library, makes it really simple for you. So they have the Open Dyslexic font that you can change the font to. There are other fonts you can change it to. So for some people, that makes it easier to read. It creates more line spacing. But you can also just change the font size or even change the color of the screen. So there's the traditional black text on white, or there's white text on black, or sepia tone, which kind of makes it look like you're reading an old movie.
I used to use that so I felt like I was reading a real book, or like a physical book.
You're like, this looks like text.
Looks like I spilled my tea on it, which happens when I read the print books all the time, so yeah.
But the library also has some books that are written in a dyslexic font. The main series is this series called Dog on a Log by Pamela Brooks, who is a doctor who's kind of worked with all of these things. But literacy teachers also talk about just listening to audiobooks or using text-to-speech software because you're making that connection between the written word and the audio. So Libby just kind of seems to be your app because you can change the fonts and you can listen to audiobooks through there.
So, but for somebody who wants physical books that are dyslexia friendly, is there an easy way for them to find them in the library?
Yeah, so you can just type dyslexia friendly into our catalog and it will bring up all the titles that we have. I spoke with our collections and the people who do the cataloging in order to find out. It's like, hey, what are some resources that we have? I was able to find some things, but I don't do the ordering. I don't do the cataloging. So what are some ways to find some things? And they were amazing. They both got back to me within like 20 minutes, and I had a huge list of books and everything. So yeah, there's a lot of great resources available for you here.
Well, awesome. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing, Scott.
Of course.
The thing I was going to talk about is actually, because we're in the middle of fall getting ready for the holiday season, is how many movies that are coming out were based on books or from book worlds, based on book characters. Because I, for one, love movies and I love books and I love pairing the two together. I'm the man who will go out and read the book just before I see the movie, which sometimes works out. Sometimes it doesn't. But I was looking at the upcoming holiday season at some of the movies, and there are some actually really big budget ones based on books. So one of the big ones coming up is, of course, Dune 2. So for anyone who hasn't seen Dune 2, you should go watch Dune 1. Or the 1980s Dune movie. I've heard it's something.
Something.
But there is the book Dune, and I recommend reading it. It is a deep dive into sci-fi. It's not a beginner's sci-fi novel by any means. But the second movie comes out in November, and so I think it'd be great to go back and read that. One of the others, actually, I'm also excited for is the new Hunger Games film, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which if you haven't read the prequel novel to the Hunger Games series, I would recommend reading it before you go see the movie, because I think it looks fantastic. And I'm stoked. I'm excited. Another big one is, of course, Wonka. So everyone's read not everyone. If you haven't read it, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is a great read. But of course, it's a prequel about Mr. Wonka, starting his business. And I think that'll be just a fun family film. But the one I'm actually most excited about this holiday season comes out on Christmas Day. It is The Color Purple, the musical, the movie. Which I'm going to be the guy who reads the book and then watches the first movie and then listens to the soundtrack and then goes to see the musical movie, because that's the level of nerdiness I aspire to.
I just saw the trailer this week when I went to see a movie, and so I'm very excited to do that. And I have actually never read The Color Purple, and so hopefully I will get to that before.
And I mean, there's many people who only know it as the movie, and when a movie is popular, sometimes that happens. People just judge it by the movie. It's like, well, you should go back and read the book first, because it's something I've had to explain to people that adaptations can be different and they can both be special. And so between the book, the movie, and now the movie musical, they can all bring something new to the story and bring the story to another generation.
Sure.
Well, awesome. Okay, well, that wraps up our last segment. And if you have any questions, if you have any comments, if you need to get in touch with us, you can always email us at booktalk@myamcpl.org. But of course, you can always walk into your local branch and talk to your librarian any day. So thank you, and we'll see you again in the winter.